People talk about how dangerous Australia is. The snakes, the spiders, the crocodiles. Everything's trying to kill you. And yeah, some of that is deserved. The inland tapir is the most venomous snake on Earth. Saltwater crocodiles get massive. Box jellyfish are nightmare fuel. Fair enough. But here's the thing that nobody mentions. Modern Australia is the safe version, the practice mode. Because for millions of years, prehistoric Australia had creatures that were so much worse that when you actually look at the fossil evidence, it doesn't even seem possible. We had lizards that were 5 to 7 meters long hunting on land, not in the water. On land with venom, we had marsupial lions that weighed 120 kilograms. They climbed trees and dropped onto prey from above, and they had the strongest bite force of any mammal ever recorded. We had crocodiles that didn't even stay in the water. They had long legs and they could chase you with teeth designed for cutting, not gripping. And all these animals lived in the same place around the same time. Multiple apex predators sharing the same territory, hunting the same prey, creating this ecosystem that was genuinely the most dangerous place on Earth for millions of years. That is not an exaggeration. That's just what Australia was. And then 50,000 years ago, humans arrived. The first Aboriginal Australians walked onto the continent with stone tools and found all of these creatures just living there. And they survived, which is impressive enough, but here's what's really weird. Within a few thousand years of humans showing up, all of these animals were extinct. The 5-meter lizards, gone. The marsupial lions, gone. The land crocodiles, gone. Everything over 100 kilograms was just completely wiped out. That timeline is suspiciously fast. Animals that survived for millions of years suddenly disappear right after humans arrive. Yeah, that's not a coincidence. Something happened. And when you look at what these creatures actually were and how they hunted and how this whole ecosystem worked, the fact that Stone Age humans not only survived but completely dismantled the entire food chain is kind of insane. So that's what we're getting into. Why prehistoric Australia was genuinely nightmare fuel, what these creatures were and how they dominated, and what exactly happened when humans showed up that caused everything to collapse. Because the more you learn about this, the weirder it gets. So here's the thing about Australia that most people don't know. It started completely underwater, the whole place. We're talking like 540 million years ago, back in the Cambrian period, and what would eventually become Australia was just sitting at the bottom of ancient seas, just submerged, and those seas were not friendly. The water had these creatures called Anomalocaris swimming around, which sounds like a made-up name, but it is real. This thing was about a meter long, which doesn't sound that big until you realize it's basically the size of your arm, and it's the apex predator of the entire ocean. It had these spiked feeding arms and a circular mouth with teeth arranged in a ring. You know, very normal stuff, but it's Australia. Can we really expect much? And it would just grab trilobites and shred them apart. We know this because we found its fossilized poop with trilobite pieces in it. So, yep, they were eating each other. But okay, so Australia eventually rose up out of the water and became actual land. It took a while. And then over the next few 100 million years, it started drifting away from all the other continents, just slowly breaking off from what used to be this massive supercontinent called Gondwana. First, it was connected to Antarctica, South America, Africa, basically everything, and then it just said no thanks and floated off on its own. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When you isolate a giant chunk of land for millions of years, evolution kind of loses its mind. There's no other way to really put it, because Australia didn't have the same predators as everywhere else. They didn't have the same prey, they didn't even have the same anything. So the animals that were stuck there had to figure out things on their own. And for some reason, that solution that they kept landing on was get bigger and more terrifying. The climate didn't help either. Australia went through basically every type of environment you can think of. It was near the South Pole at one point, which meant ice and cold. Then it drifted north and got hotter. Parts of it were lush rainforest. Other parts were complete desert. And the whole time, animals were adapting to these changes by becoming increasingly nightmare-inducing. We're going to cover a lot of time here. We're talking Cambrian seas with alien-looking predators, then the age of dinosaurs, where Australia had its own unique species because it was so isolated. Then after the dinosaurs died, we get to the Cenozoic era, which is when mammals took over. And in Australia, those mammals were marsupials. You know, the ones that are supposed to be kangaroos with pouches, except these marsupials evolved into things that absolutely should not have pouches. We're talking lion-sized predators with the strongest bite force of any mammal ever, just casually hanging out with pouches. And this whole process took hundreds of millions of years. So it's not like there was just one scary period and then it calmed down. No, Australia was consistently terrifying for longer than you would even think was possible. Different eras, different monsters, same general energy of everything here can kill you. The real peak though, the absolute worst time to be in Australia, was probably the Pleistocene. That's the Ice Age era, around 50,000 years ago, because by then, Australia had been isolated long enough that evolution had created this complete nightmare ecosystem. You had multiple apex predators, you had herbivores the size of cars, and you had reptiles that could kill basically anything. And then humans showed up. The first people to reach Australia walked into what was genuinely the most dangerous place on Earth. They didn't have any modern weapons or anything, just stone tools. The fact that they survived is kind of insane when you look at what they were dealing with, but we're going to get into that later. But the main thing to understand right now is that Australia's isolation created this evolutionary pressure cooker. Animals here didn't have to compete with the same species as the rest of the world, so they went in completely different directions, and those directions were usually get massive or develop the ability to kill things twice your size, and sometimes both. The fossil record from Australia is full of stuff that just sounds fake. 5-meter lizards, carnivorous kangaroos, land crocodiles that could chase you, lions that could climb trees and dropped onto prey from above. Again, I'm not making any of this up. These are real animals that existed for millions of years, and they only really went extinct relatively recently, which is somehow worse. So that's the history you need to know. Australia started underwater, became isolated, then spent the next several hundred billion years creating increasingly unhinged wildlife. Cool. Anyways, it's time for me to introduce you to some of these things. Let's start with the worst one first. Megalania. This was a monitor lizard, actually the same family as the Komodo dragon, except it was 5 to 7 meters long, which is like 20 feet. Some estimates say it weighed over a ton. So you're dealing with a lizard the size of a small car, and it hunted on land. Komodo dragons today have venomous bites, and they can take down water buffalo. So now imagine that, but 3 times bigger and faster. Megalania could run. It had powerful legs, and it would chase prey across open ground. And once it bit you, that was pretty much it. The venom would stop your blood from clotting, so you would just bleed out while this thing followed you around waiting for your collapse. It was a very efficient killer, and it was very horrifying. We don't have a complete skeleton of Megalania, which is annoying because it means that we're still guessing some of the details, but the fossils we do have show some clear things. This thing was massive, and it ate whatever it wanted. Fossils show it lived during the Pleistocene era, so it was around when humans first arrived in Australia. Aboriginal stories talk about a giant lizard, and yeah, it was probably this thing. Can you imagine being the first people to land in Australia and you see a 20-foot venomous lizard walking towards you? I would get back in my boat. Next up is Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, and yes, it had a pouch. This thing was about the size of a leopard, so like 120 kilograms, but it had the strongest bite force of any mammal relative to its body size. Stronger than actual lions, stronger than hyenas, just absurd bite strength. And its teeth weren't even normal teeth. It had these giant premolars that worked like scissors, so it would bite down and just slice straight through bone. But here's the fun part. Thylacoleo could climb trees. We know this because we found claw marks in caves going up the walls, and its arms were built for it. So this thing would sit in trees and wait for prey to walk by, and then it would just drop onto them. Yes, this was a drop bear that actually existed, except instead of being a koala, it was a 120 kilogram predator with claws and scissor teeth. It had a retractable thumb claw, which is a sentence that should not apply to a predator, but here we are. Thylacoleo lived from about 2 million years ago up until around 40,000 years ago. So again, humans overlapped with this thing. Getting stressed just thinking about it. We often make the joke that Australians are unhinged people and they're kind of crazy and rough around the edges. Well, when you understand that their ancestors had to deal with all this stuff, it kind of starts to make a little sense. We haven't even talked about the oceans yet, because during the Cretaceous period, Australia's inland areas were covered by shallow seas, and in those seas was Kronosaurus. This was a pliosaur, basically a marine reptile with a massive head and flippers. It was about 10 meters long, and the skull alone was nearly 3 meters. Its teeth were the size of bananas. We're talking 30-centimeter teeth. Kronosaurus could bite with the same force as a modern saltwater crocodile, except except it was way bigger. It ate other marine reptiles, it ate giant squid, it ate anything. There's really no limit to what it would attack. Scientists think it could have swallowed an adult human whole, which is a weird thing to calculate, but they did it anyway. You know, that's really reassuring to know that, right? The teeth weren't just big either, they were serrated. So this thing didn't just bite and hold on, it bit and sawed through flesh. Imagine a crocodile, but it's 3 times bigger and lives in deeper water, so you can't even see it coming. That was the ocean in prehistoric Australia. So those are 3 of the big ones. A land lizard bigger than any predator today, a tree climbing marsupial with the strongest bite on record, and a sea monster with teeth the size of your forearm. And there were way more than just these 3, but you get the idea. Australia was a bad place to live, no matter which time you lived in. But knowing they existed is only one thing. Knowing how they actually killed is much, much worse, because the hunting methods these creatures used were genuinely disturbing. Thylacoleo had this whole strategy worked out. I mentioned that it could climb trees, but did I tell you that it would sit in a tree branch completely still and just wait? It could be hours, it didn't matter. And when something walked underneath, it dropped straight down onto the prey's back. The impact alone probably stunned whatever it landed on, and then the claws would dig in. Those thumb claws I mentioned earlier, yeah, they worked to hold the animal in place, while Thylacoleo went for the neck. The bite was the worst part, because of how its teeth were shaped. When Thylacoleo bit down, it didn't just puncture, it sliced. The big premolar teeth would close and cut straight through whatever they touched. Bone, muscle, tissue, fiber, it didn't matter. The bite force meant that it could do this in one motion. We found marks on fossil bones that show clear cuts from these teeth, not fractures, not breaks, but bones being cut in half. Scientists think that it went for the throat most of the time. It was a quick killer, because Thylacoleo had such strong front legs, it could wrestle prey to the ground if the drop didn't work. There's evidence it might have hunted alone or in pairs, but honestly, it probably didn't need help. A 120 kilogram predator falling out of a tree with that bite, yeah, there's not much that's going to be able to survive that. What makes this worse is where Thylacoleo lived. It was in forests, yeah, but also in more open woodlands, so there wasn't always a clear line of sight. You would be walking through scattered trees, and every one of them could have a marsupial lion sitting in it, and you wouldn't know until it was already on you, with no warning. Just wait and claws, and then it's over. Megalania hunted completely different. It didn't hide because it didn't need to. It was big enough that it could just walk up to things, but it was also patient. Modern lizards today can track prey for days, and Megalania probably did the same thing. It would bite once, and that bite delivered venom, and then it would just follow the animal around. As I mentioned earlier, the venom stopped blood from clotting, so every single wound it caused would keep bleeding, and Megalania's teeth created a lot of wounds. They were serrated on the edges, so each bite wasn't clean, and the animal would get weaker and weaker from blood loss, and eventually it would collapse. At that point, Megalania could take its time. It didn't have to fight or struggle. Dinner was ready. There's a debate about whether Megalania actually had venom or if it was bacteria in the mouth. So when Quinkana bit, it shredded whatever it bit into, and because it was chasing prey on land, it probably aimed for the legs first, bring the animal down, and then go for the kill. We found Quinkana fossils in cave deposits with other animal bones nearby, which suggests it was actively hunting near these areas. It was maybe using caves as ambush points, which would make sense. Wait near the cave entrance, something walks by, sprint out and grab it. The thing about Quinkana is it filled this role that didn't exist anywhere else. Land crocodiles weren't a thing in other parts of the world during this time, but in Australia, isolated and weird, as always, evolution decided crocs should be able to chase you, and it worked. Quinkana survived from the Miocene all the way up to the Pleistocene, millions of years of successfully being a land-based croc with knife teeth. Each of these predators had zero overlap in their hunting methods. Thylacoleo ambushed from above, Megalania used venom and patience, Quinkana chased and slashed, and they all worked. That's 3 completely different strategies that all led to the same result, which was everything else being dead. There was no safe option. Ground level, Quinkana and Megalania. Trees, Thylacoleo. Water, well, we haven't even gotten to the crocodiles that actually stayed in the water, but they were there too. And if we were in the prehistoric time, you had to deal with a pliosaur. The whole environment was just layered threats from every possible angle. It's a really fun place to live. And when you put all of this together, all you're left with is an ecosystem that you can only describe as absurd. And when you put all of these together, the ecosystem just gets absurd. The thing that's hard to wrap your head around is that all of these predators lived in the same place at the same time. Thylacoleo, Megalania, Quinkana, giant snakes, big eagles, they were all hunting in overlapping territories, and somehow there was enough prey to support all of them. The prey had to be massive to feed this many predators. And they were. Diprotodon was the biggest marsupial to ever exist. It was 3 meters long and over 2 meters tall and weighed close to 3 tons. It was basically a wombat but the size of a rhinoceros. And there were herds of these things, just groups of multi-ton herbivores walking around eating shrubs. Diprotodon wasn't fast and it wasn't particularly aggressive, because it didn't need to be. Nothing's taking down a 3-ton animal unless it's desperate or the Diprotodon's already hurt. So adult Diprotodons were mostly safe, but young ones, that was a different story. Juvenile Diprotodons were absolutely on the menu for Thylacoleo and Megalania. We have found fossil evidence of this. Bite marks from both predators on young Diprotodon bones. Then you had Procoptodon, the giant short-faced kangaroo. This thing stood 2 to 3 meters tall, which is taller than almost every single human, and weighed 230 kilograms, and had these long arms with big claws that were probably used for pulling down branches to eat. But those claws could also be used for defense. Kangaroos today can kick hard enough to disembowel predators. Procoptodon was twice the size. One kick from that and you would be done. So the herbivores weren't helpless. They were huge and some of them were even armed, but there were enough predators with different strategies that the herbivores had to constantly be on alert. You can't relax under a tree because Thylacoleo. You can't stay in the open too long because Megalania and Quinkana. You can't go in the water because crocodiles and giant snakes were there. The ecosystem worked because everything was big. You need big prey to support big predators, and Australia had both. Fossil sites show that all of these animals were living in the same regions, dying in the same places, hunting and being hunted in this closed loop. The Naracoorte caves in South Australia have piles of bones from dozens of species, all from the same time period. Thylacoleo, Diprotodon, giant kangaroos, Tasmanian tigers, all mixed together. What's interesting is the predators probably competed with each other even. Thylacoleo and Megalania were both apex predators, so they had to have crossed paths, and there's no clear answer for who would have won that fight. Thylacoleo had the bite force and the claws, but Megalania had size and venom. Honestly, it probably came down to who got the first hit in, but they coexisted, which means they figured out how to avoid each other most of the time, or they targeted different prey. The food chain went deep too. You had smaller predators filling other roles. Thylacines, the Tasmanian tigers, were around back then too. They went after the mid-sized prey. There were giant snakes like Wanambi hanging around water sources, grabbing anything that came to drink. Birds of prey overhead, and then smaller marsupial predators going after rodents and lizards. Every size category had something trying to eat it. And this lasted for millions of years. The Pleistocene ecosystem with all of these megafauna stayed stable for a long time. Predators kept the herbivore populations in check. The herbivores ate enough plants to shape the landscape, but not so much that they destroyed it. Everything balanced out in this really violent way that somehow worked. And Aboriginal people living during this time had to navigate all of it. They were part of the ecosystem, but they weren't at the top. Not with Thylacoleo and Megalania around, so they had to be smart about where they went and when, and they were. They survived for thousands of years alongside these creatures, which takes some serious skill and knowledge. But nothing lasts forever, and this ecosystem, well, it fell apart fast. Because what happened next was basically a total collapse. Multiple things killed off these animals, and as I mentioned earlier, humans were definitely one, but they weren't the only problem. Australia's had a rough history with extinction events. There have been several. The Permian extinction happened around 252 million years ago, and it wiped out 85% of all species on Earth. They call it the Great Dying, which should tell you about how bad it was. Basically, everything died. Real big shocker, I know. The oceans emptied out, land animals disappeared, and then life had to start over from scratch. That reset the whole planet, Australia included. All of those early creatures we talked about at the beginning, yeah, they're gone. And then new things evolved to replace them, which led to the dinosaur era. That went fine for a while, and then 66 million years ago, an asteroid hit Earth and killed all of the non-bird dinosaurs. Another reset. Kronosaurus, dead. All the big marine reptiles, dead. The land dinosaurs, mega dead. These extinction events were global, so Australia didn't get special treatment here. Everything went extinct everywhere. But here's what's different about the Pleistocene extinction. That one was mostly just Australia, and it happened fast. Around 50,000 years ago, humans arrived in Australia for the first time. The Aboriginal Australians showed up and found this continent full of megafauna. giant wombats, marsupial lions, 7-meter lizards, all of it, all of the creatures we just talked about. And within a few thousand years, almost all of those animals were gone. We're talking about creatures that survived for millions of years. And then humans showed up and suddenly they're extinct. There's debate on how much humans were actually responsible for versus climate change, because the climate was shifting too. Australia was getting drier. There were droughts and the environment was changing from forests to more open grassland in a lot of areas. And that would have stressed the megafauna populations even without the human interference. But the timing is really suspicious. Fossil evidence shows that Diprotodon went extinct around 46,000 years ago. Ginornis, the big thunderbird, also went extinct around that time. Thylacoleo, Megalania, Quinkana, all of them disappeared within a few thousand years of humans arriving. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. Humans were hunting them. We know this because we have found sites with megafauna bones that show butchering marks, which are cut marks from stone tools and burned bones near fire pits. We've also found Ginornis eggshells that were deliberately broken and cooked. People were actively killing and eating these animals. The problem for the megafauna was that they weren't used to humans. They had never encountered tool-using predators before, and humans hunt differently than other predators. We plan. We coordinate. We use fire to drive animals into traps. The megafauna had no defense against that because they never had needed one. And these animals bred slowly. Diprotodon probably had one baby at a time, maybe every few years, which is normal for large mammals, but it means the population can't recover quickly from hunting pressure. If humans are killing adults faster than the population can replace them, that's it. Extinction. There's also the fire thing. Aboriginal Australians used controlled burns to manage the landscape, burning old vegetation to encourage new growth, clearing areas for easier hunting, which is smart land management. But it changed the environment. A lot of the megafauna were adapted to forests and dense vegetation. When humans started burning those areas into grasslands, the food sources disappeared. Diprotodon ate shrubs and trees. If you turn the forest into grass, there's nothing for Diprotodon to eat. And when the herbivores die off, the predators that eat them also die. Thylacoleo needed big prey. No Diprotodon means no food for Thylacoleo. The whole food chain collapses from the bottom up. Climate change made this worse. The last glacial maximum happened around 20,000 years ago. Australia got even drier. Water sources shrank, droughts lasted longer. The megafauna were already stressed from human hunting and habitat loss, and now the environment itself was killing them. They couldn't adapt fast enough. By 40,000 years ago, it was over. Everything over 100 kilograms went extinct. That's the cutoff. Smaller animals survived because they could hide, they bred faster, and they needed less food. But the big guys, all gone. Megalania, gone. Thylacoleo, gone. Diprotodon, gone. The entire ecosystem that had existed for millions of years just vanished. What's wild is how quickly it happened. We're not talking about a gradual decline over hundreds of thousands of years. This was maybe 5,000 to 10,000 years from when humans arrived to when the megafauna disappeared, which is nothing in geological time. That's a blink. Other continents went through similar extinctions when humans arrived. Mammoths in North America, giant sloths in South America, moas in New Zealand. There's this pattern where humans show up and the megafauna dies. It's not a mystery anymore. We are pretty much sure we know what happened. We murdered them. But Australia's was particularly brutal because of how isolated it was. The animals here had no experience with human level intelligence as a threat. They didn't know to run. They didn't know to avoid areas where humans were. By the time they might have started learning, it was too late. Populations had already crashed too far to recover. The survivors were the smaller, faster animals. Kangaroos made it. Emus made it. Wombats made it, though not the giant ones. Tasmanian tigers survived on the mainland for a while, and then later, only in Tasmania. Everything else, fossil record only. Which brings us back today, and the comparison is actually a little ironic. Modern Australia has this reputation for being deadly. People joke about it constantly. The spiders, the snakes, the jellyfish, the crocodiles, the guys at the bar, everything is trying to kill you, supposedly. And sure, some of that's true. The inland tapian is the most venomous snake in the world. Saltwater crocodiles get up to 6 or 7 meters, and a box of jellyfish can kill you in minutes. It's not a safe place for a bloke like you. But compared to prehistoric Australia, this is the safe version. This is the Australia with all of the nightmare creatures removed. Because yeah, the inland tapian is venomous, but it's also tiny and shy and mostly hides underground. It's not trying to kill you, it just wants to protect itself. On the other hand, Wannabe was a 5-meter constrictor that could actually swallow you. Which is worse? I'll let you pick. Saltwater crocs are scary. I am not arguing against that, but Quinkana could chase you on land with teeth designed for cutting, and Megalania was bigger than any croc while also being venomous and fast. The modern threats are manageable. The prehistoric ones weren't. Funnel web spiders have venom that can kill you if untreated, but you can step on a spider. You can't step on a 2-meter tall bird that weighs 200 kilograms. You can't step on a 120 kilogram marsupial lion. You can't step on anything that was even alive back then. The scale is completely different. What is interesting is that Aboriginal stories remember some of this. The bunyip is this creature from Dreamtime stories, described as a big animal that lived in billabongs and swamps. Some historians think it's based on Diprotodon, because Diprotodon bones would have been around water holes, and finding a 3-meter skeleton would definitely create some legends. The rainbow serpent is another one, which is a giant snake from Aboriginal mythology, and Australia had Wannabe, an actual giant snake living in the same areas where these stories originated. It's possible that early Aboriginal people saw these snakes or found the remains and the stories stuck around. Aboriginal Australians survived alongside these creatures for thousands of years before they went extinct. That takes knowledge and skill that's hard to even comprehend. They had stone tools. That's it. No guns, no metal, just rocks and wood and fire. And they hunted Diprotodon, they avoided Thylacoleo, and they learned which areas had Megalania and stayed away. The fact that they not only survived but thrived is impressive. They turned Australia from a nightmare continent into a manageable one, mostly by hunting the nightmares into extinction, but still effective strategy. So the next time someone says Australia is dangerous because of the spiders, just remember that there used to be 5-meter lizards there. There used to be land crocodiles with knife teeth. There used to be lions in the trees. Modern Australia is tame. We're living in the aftermath of the scary version, and frankly, I think we got lucky. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give it a like and comment down below what you think of prehistoric Australia and what you thought of my Australian accent. I thought it was amazing, but you let me know too. If you don't want to miss any of our future uploads, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the hype button to make sure this video gets seen by more people. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, you can click the video on screen now.